US President Donald Trump said Ukraine and Russia will have to concede territory. He was speaking ahead of Friday's bilateral meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. Well, ahead of Friday's meeting, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has invited the US President.
What happens when two of the world's most scrutinized leaders meet to decide the future of one of the most devastating conflicts of the 21st century? In a matter of days, Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump will sit down in Alaska, and both Ukraine and the world are watching with anticipation, caution, and deep uncertainty. A high-stakes meeting in Alaska. In the frigid expanse of Alaska, far from the front lines of the war but at the very center of its diplomatic battlefield, a meeting is set to take place. On one side sits Russian President Vladimir Putin, a leader who has maintained an unwavering stance since launching the full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022. On the other side is US President Donald Trump, returning to the world stage with promises of deals and solutions, and a reputation for unorthodox diplomacy. This summit, scheduled against the backdrop of more than 3 years of war, is unlike any other. It is not just about military lines or territory on a map. It is about competing visions for the future of Ukraine, Europe, and Russia's role in the global order. Both leaders come with entrenched positions, and neither seems ready to compromise without extracting significant concessions. Russia's unyielding demands. Since the earliest days of the conflict, Putin's objectives have remained consistent: to cement Russia's territorial gains, keep Ukraine out of NATO, and gradually pull the country back into Moscow's sphere of influence. In June, during talks in Istanbul, Russia outlined a memorandum that offered Ukraine two options for establishing a 30-day ceasefire. The first option demanded that Ukraine withdraw its forces from 4 key regions: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. These regions were illegally annexed by Moscow in September 2022, but remain only partially under Russian control. The second option, described as a package proposal, called for Ukraine to halt mobilization, freeze Western arms deliveries, and ban the presence of any foreign troops. Additionally, Moscow proposed that Ukraine end martial law and hold elections, setting the stage for a comprehensive peace treaty. The Russian side also insists on international legal recognition of its annexations, not only of the 2022 territories, but also of Crimea, annexed in 2014. Alongside these demands, Moscow seeks Ukrainian neutrality between Russia and the West, restrictions on the size of Ukraine's armed forces, and recognition of Russian as an official state language. Further provisions call for banning what the Kremlin describes as the glorification and propaganda of Nazism and neo-Nazism. Alongside dissolving nationalist organizations, accusations that Ukraine and its allies have consistently rejected as baseless. Finally, Moscow's proposal envisions a complete lifting of sanctions, the resumption of trade and diplomatic ties, and the abandonment of any claims to wartime reparations. Yet despite months of negotiations, Putin's foreign policy advisor Yuri Ushakov made it clear: there have been no shifts in Russia's position. Ukraine's firm resistance. If Moscow's demands are maximalist, Kyiv's stance is equally resolute. The memorandum Ukraine presented in Istanbul emphasized the necessity of a full and unconditional 30-day ceasefire as the first step toward peace talks. But beyond the ceasefire, Ukraine drew firm red lines. Kyiv rejects any notion of neutral status, framing it as an infringement on national sovereignty. It maintains that NATO membership is a sovereign decision, dependent on agreement with the alliance, and not subject to external veto. Ukraine also opposes any restrictions on the size of its armed forces or limitations on hosting foreign troops. On territorial integrity, Ukraine's position is unequivocal. It will not recognize Russian control over any annexed territory. The current line of contact, Kyiv suggests, could serve only as a temporary reference point for negotiations, not a settlement. Ukraine also insists on robust international security guarantees to ensure any peace deal is enforceable and to prevent renewed aggression. Humanitarian issues are central to its demands. including the return of all deported and illegally displaced children, and a full prisoner exchange. While Kyiv's proposal does allow for the gradual lifting of certain sanctions if Russia complies with agreements, it refuses to concede on sovereignty, alliance choice, or territorial control. The Trump factor. Donald Trump's involvement introduces a layer of unpredictability. Over the years, he has spoken both admiringly of Putin and critically of his actions, sometimes in the same breath. Earlier this year, he clashed sharply with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during an Oval Office meeting, but later moderated his tone. Trump has publicly expressed frustration with both sides, threatening new sanctions on Moscow while suggesting there could be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both nations. This vague comment has stirred anxiety in Kyiv and among European allies, who fear that any behind-closed-doors deal between Trump and Putin might pressure Ukraine into unwelcome concessions. The fact that Trump plans to meet with Putin without Zelensky at the table only deepens these concerns. Critics warn that such an arrangement could tilt the negotiations in Russia's favor, leaving Ukraine diplomatically sidelined. Europe's watchful eyes. For European leaders, the Alaska summit is not just about Ukraine, it's about the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the balance of power in Europe. They have rallied behind Kyiv's position that no peace can be imposed without Ukraine's consent. Zelensky expressed his gratitude to these allies in a public message. The end of the war must be fair, and I am grateful to everyone who stands with Ukraine and our people. European governments see any settlement that validates Russia's territorial claims as a dangerous precedent, potentially encouraging similar actions elsewhere in the world. Their fear is that if Ukraine is forced into a disadvantageous deal, the security architecture of Europe could be permanently destabilized, leaving smaller nations vulnerable to coercion by larger powers. Calculations behind Putin's strategy. Analysts believe Putin sees time as his ally. Ukrainian forces remain stretched along a vast front while enduring continuous missile and drone strikes. By prolonging the war, Moscow could weaken Ukraine's defenses and test the resolve of Western supporters. Sam Green of King's College London suggests Putin may use Trump to secure a ceasefire that locks in Russian control, giving him space to consolidate gains. Meanwhile, Putin has been engaging leaders from China, India, South Africa, and former Soviet states, likely seeking broader support or understanding for any future deal. Risks of a ceasefire. Without resolution, a ceasefire might pause the fighting, but without resolving core disputes could pave the way for renewed conflict. Green warned such a truce could leave Russia in control without effective deterrence. Tatiana Stanovaya of the Carnegie Russia and Eurasia Center says Moscow's core demands remain unchanged. Ukraine stops resisting, Western arms shipments end, and Kyiv accepts Russian terms. She predicts the likeliest outcome is another failed peace attempt, leaving the conflict unresolved. What's at stake in Alaska? The Alaska summit is more than diplomacy. It's a test of resolve, negotiation skill, and global unity. An agreement could reshape the war's course. Failure may mean years of renewed fighting and uneasy truces. For Putin, the goal is securing territorial recognition and weakening Ukraine's Western ties. For Trump, it's a chance to prove his deal-making or face backlash for perceived concessions. For Ukraine, it's about sovereignty, security, and survival. The outcome could shape not only Ukraine's future, but also the principles of international conflict for decades. Share your thoughts, subscribe for ongoing updates, and stay informed as history unfolds in real time. In peace, sons bury their fathers. In war, fathers bury their sons. Herodotus.